Are you getting feedback? No. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tampa Bay Transportation Management Area Leadership Group. Today's agenda, I'm sure everybody has today's agenda, but I'd like to let everyone know that we are here, we're all masked up, and we're going to cover a lot of business today. This meeting is not hybrid, but it is being televised through YouTube, so that those that are in our virtual world are actually just listening today. So, I'm Kimberly Overman, the chair of this group, and a member of the Hillsborough MPO. Vice Chair Catherine Starkey is not here yet, but Dave Eggers, our other Vice Chair, is here. Everybody would like to basically introduce themselves and what they represent before we get started. That would be terrific. Do you want to start at this end?
Yes, Dave Albritton, Ford Pinellas.
Whit Layton, Ford Pinellas, currently moving.
Dave Eggers, Pinellas County Commission, and Janet, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Janet Long, Pinellas County Commission.
Good morning, I'm Beth Alden, the Director of the Hillsborough TPO.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm Charles Clue with Port Tampa Bay in the Hillsborough TPO.
Commissioner Starkey, Pasco County MPO.
And Carl McKiska with Pasco County MPO.
Excellent. And those of in the
all right
here.
Good morning, Brad Miller with PSTA. Welcome to PSTA.
Good morning, David Glenn at
Okay. And we have several folks in the audience that may or may be doing presentations today. The meeting objectives today are to review the annual major priority projects, discuss funding flexibility, and to discuss the federal infrastructure legislation. What we first need to do is approve the minutes of June 25th. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Excellent. We have a motion and a second by Catherine Starkey and and Dave Eggers. All approved. I don't think we need to do a roll call since we're all right here. Any proof? Any objections? Motion passed and meeting minutes have been approved. Next on the agenda is the review of the proposed 2022 priorities, unless you have the other items that you'd like for us to. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. My apologies. We do have a period set aside for public comment. Do we have any public comment for those that are in the room today? Hearing none. Do we have anyone on the phone or on the line? Okay. So apparently we're good with public comment today. And with that, we'll move on to the review of the proposed 2022 priorities given by Chelsea Favero.
All right, good morning, Chelsea Favero, Ford Pinellas staff. I'm going to review today with you the major regional priorities. So this group comes together about quarterly and each year takes action on major regional priorities for the immediate Tampa Bay area, the TMA urbanized area. We do this because we are one of the top 20 most populated regions in the county, and we really need to be working together on our regional plans, especially for transportation, to plan and prioritize and fund those kinds of improvements that will in turn shape our future. So this right here is really just a snapshot. You'll see on the map, this is the broader SCTPA region, of which you all are a subcommittee representing the urbanized region. But this is why we really plan across county lines. We consist of 8 counties, nearly 30,000 road miles. Our population is currently about 4 million people, and we do plan to add more than 3 million people over the next 20 years. And we also are projecting to have over 3 million jobs by 2045. So it is really important that the transportation priorities for this region are looked at the regional level and not just at the county level. So as I said, this is a process that we do each year. We develop the annual list of priorities, and it's really a list of those major projects that help advance the regional long-range transportation plan. There's a copy of that in front of you today. So projects that have been funded because of our collective support are listed on your screen. Some really major ones like the West Shore Interchange or the University Parkway Interchange down in Sarasota County, the Courtney Campbell Causeway Trail. All of these have been made possible because we've come together as a region to talk to the state and the federal government and say, these are our priorities, help us fund them to move us forward. Okay. So in the list in your packet and up on the screen here, these are the unfunded priorities. You'll see on the list in your packet, there's also a list of funded priorities. Those do remain on the list until they are complete, because until they're done, they're not done. And we want to make sure that if there is a need for more funding or advocacy, this group can quickly come together to state, listen, this is still a priority of ours. But for your unfunded priorities, you'll see a list of 5 projects in front of you. And now these projects are in some stage of planning, but because there are still 5 of them at this time, staff is not recommending that we add any additional projects to advocate for in 2022. We're asking that we continue to just advance these 5 projects with a few minor edits to the text, because they're not done yet. They haven't advanced very far into the work program, and we want to make sure that these are the 5 that we're really pushing hard for to move forward for the next year. That includes the I-75 interchange at Gibsonton, safety and operational improvements at downtown Tampa and I-4 interchange, express lanes along I-275. There's a note here, that one is pending an amendment into the TIP, so that one may be receiving some funding very soon, but until it's done, it's not done. So it's going to stay on here. Regional rapid transit in the I-275 corridor, and also support for HARTS exploration and negotiation for use of the CSX tracks. So today, this item is just being brought to you for discussion. We'll bring this back to you in December for you to take final action. But we'd like to start the discussion today so that we as staff have time to go back, revise the list appropriately, and then bring back to you for final action at your December meeting. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Could you go back to the unfunded priority list so that we have that on the screen as we have this discussion? Thank you very, very much.
Of course.
Comments?
Yeah, did we not have State Road 54 and US 41 on this list?
That was not on the list. One of the funded priorities up in Pasco right now is the I-75 interchange at Overpass, but
On the
54,
unfunded.
41. Correct.
On the
50
unfunded. So we have nothing in Pasco County?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Alden, you're recognized.
Thank you. So I'm kind of excited about this unfunded priority list because we too have a project on the list for which there's been a recent announcement about funding, and so we may be able to move that I-275 safety and operational improvements of that downtown interchange onto our funded list. And what that suggests to me is that we should probably be talking about the next big projects that we want to work together on as a group.
Excellent, excellent. Mariana?
Thank you. You know, Commissioner Starkey brings up a good point. US 41 and 54 is a big clog up for us continually, and it's something we need to go build some type of overpass, either go north, south, east, west, whatever. So at some point, I'd like to get that added in. It's a very key part of Pasco County.
Well, it looks like we might have room on the list. So I do, any other discussion regarding that particular item?
Well, just last night, FDOT held a meeting on this interchange. You know, it's been the #1 problem in Pasco County for a long time. So I think we're moving along, and I would love to see it on the unfunded, because it's not funded, right, Secretary Quinn?
No, it's not funded at this point.
Yeah, and you know, we've been working on it for a long time. You might recall a number of years ago, we had the unsolicited bid to double-deck State Road 54 from that Spanish transportation company. So it is a big choke point for the region. So we'd love to see it on the list.
Madam Chair.
Excellent. You recognize?
Thank you. I apologize. I missed the last 2 TMA meetings for, I can't even remember the reasons, but they were legitimate. But I didn't have, as in not in.
Versus illegitimate.
But I do remember very early on when I became a participant of this group, hearing Commissioner Starkey and Commissioner Mariano speak very ardently and articulately about the need for 51 to be on the list. 54. And I do think that because Pasco County has been such a good regional partner, that in the spirit of communicating our regional emphasis, that we should allow that to be on the list. What would be the reason why we wouldn't?
It's a good question. Any response to the inquiry? Mr. Eckert, you're right.
Yeah, Commissioner Long, that's what I was going to say. I know that Pasco County has been going through some incredible growth, and that connection and job connections to Tampa is just incredibly important. And so I think that's the driver for me. I think it needs to be on there. I think we need to be addressing it as one of those regional corridors that is critical. And so, yeah, I would support it be, maybe as Beth was saying, replacing that second one there so that we're still keeping it at 5, trying not to get too big. I think, again, what we did a few years ago is make the I-75 State Road 60 that #1 priority, and we got it. And so when we get too many, they're going to, it gets diffused in its messaging. So I'd like to keep it to 5 and add that to it in exchange for moving the second one up.
All right, is that a motion?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. I was just looking for a motion, folks, so tell me what you need to know.
No.
Do we have a quorum enough to do what we need to do today? Okay. Hearing no objections, any other comments regarding the motion? Okay. To be on the safe side, could we do a roll call just to get a consensus?
Yes.
I know we could do consensus, but can we do a roll call vote for those?
Sure.
Okay. Let's start at this end.
Yeah.
Yes.
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Good deal. So we're at, if you could get a good description and add that to the list of the unfunded priorities, and anticipating that the I-275 safety and operational improvements will move to a funded list and off of the unfunded list. Mr. Quinn, do you have any comments you'd like to offer?
No, it is true, the I-275, I-4 operational improvements were funded as part of the governor's announcement last, I guess, Monday, along with the West Shore Interchange, and several other projects that we'll be doing in the area that are a little smaller, but still good projects. And I would like to just reiterate what you heard a little earlier about the importance of the regional voice. When I spoke to our folks in central office who deal with the governor's office on, the Tampa Bay region got a lot more than any other region in the state. And, I was told a lot of that was because we spoke as a region. You saw we had the Speaker of the House from Pinellas that was there, touting the West Shore Interchange project, the Speaker or the Senate President from Pasco County, both saying how this was such a big regional priority in that they received so many letters of support from counties, cities, other transportation agencies, the business community. And I think that just showed if we speak as a region, we can really be a major player on these types of funding projects. So I thank you all for being so supportive of it. I think there wasn't anybody that was asked to support it that said no, and even if it wasn't in their backyard. And so I think if we continue to think and promote ourselves regionally, we can have a lot of really good things happen.
I had a question.
Thank you, Secretary Quinn. I appreciate that. Mr. Eggert.
Yeah, David, is there any, again, I think limiting the list as we're doing here is a good thing. We've got 5 priorities. Is there any value that you see in further culling that list into a top priority, or do you think what we have right now is a good way of approaching securing, upping our odds of securing funding?
Right, so, none of these projects really raised to the level of a funding requirement that the Western Interchange obviously did, a $1.2 billion program. Most of the projects on here are probably, with the exception of perhaps the CSX, are much less money. In fact, on the I-275 express lanes from 375 to Gandy, we have programmed the design of that to start very soon, and hopefully we'll be able to program construction in not too distant. There's really no right-of-way but one parcel for it. So some of these will be moving along at their own, but we may find one that we really need more than just going through our normal work program cycle and looking for funding to coalesce around. And so I think at some point we may find that. But for now, I think we've got, I can tell you, if you believe the revenue projections and you believe what you're hearing out of Washington in terms of the potential for additional funding, I think we're going to have some really good opportunities for projects like these that are more manageable.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much. Other comments? I'd like to actually talk about the CSX-related projects and where we are. Hillsborough County recently reviewed the passenger rail options at our board meeting on Tuesday to kind of present the scope of possible long-term possibilities for addressing passenger rail as an option, or passenger using the right-of-way as a way of moving lots of people, not only in Hillsborough, but how that connects to the rest of the region. It was, from my take, seemed as though it was very well received. And at the last TMA meeting, we discussed possibly having this group, all the stakeholders, not only this group, but possibly their boards or those individuals that are really looking at how we move a lot of people around in this entire region, and conducting a workshop to address how the right-of-way of CSX could actually serve the entire region. And to your comment earlier, when we spoke in one voice, we got the funding we needed for our region. I would like to continue that trend as much as possible so that this entire region is successful at finding the funding that we need. Transportation planning, when it involves rail, is a much longer type of planning process than maybe some of the options that we've been looking at. So I would like to not only keep the Heart Exploration project on the list, but consider expanding that to a regional type of effort, if that would be appropriate. Because I do believe that, Pinellas would benefit, Pasco would benefit, actually even Manatee would benefit, Polk would benefit, if we really explore and have a productive conversation with CSX about what our long-range possible passenger rail options are, whether it be the right-of-way or actually the rail. And I am of the mindset that when you go to negotiate with someone, if you put all your cards on the table, sometimes that really provides a productive negotiation rather than hiding cards or not having cards at the table. So if I would love to have some discussion about that, and then see if there is interest in having each member of this group be interested in pulling together a workshop to have a further discussion on that particular item, as that is on our unfunded priority list. It's been on Hillsborough County's priority list for like 30 years. And we're actually looking to move it forward with understanding the local match is going to be a challenge for all of us. And so we will have to look for ways that we can actually make that happen so that we can get state and federal support for that kind of effort. You had a question, a comment? Yes.
No, you just turned yourself off.
Okay,
I did the same.
By the way, I apologize for being late. I had some physical therapy, and it's been a 6-month process, and I just got a little bit of traffic coming down here. So
There's an accident on 19.
Yeah, that's what I went through.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Congestion is an issue. Maybe we could get other ways of dealing with it.
Yeah. But I missed the last one, but I had a legitimate reason too. But I was delighted to hear that Hillsborough was taking a step forward to do the exploration to work with CSX through HART. And I want to say back, it was probably 6, 7 years ago, we had Bob O'Malley from CSX come to us and show us that the rail line running all the way from Brooksville all the way down through Tampa downtown, and also running from USF just about through Oldsmar, through Pinellas County, all the way down to St. Pete. That whole thing, to me, if we can, however you want to do it, I mean, I'm just happy you're making the move forward, that's a great thing. But however, I think if we have DOT in the mix, have the other counties ready to go to be at the table, I think it's a great worthy dialogue, and for long term, let's start the core right there in Tampa. I'm good with that. Let that be the first branch anyway, and then as we expand it out, we can kind of like build up more and more enthusiasm. As you get one section done, it'll be easy to keep on adding and adding and adding, but if we think big, think regionally, I think it's a great way to go.
Thank you, thank you. That's kind of my same mindset. Ms. Starkey.
And I would agree with that, and that's a long-term regional solution, but we have a short-term regional solution in the BRT that we've been talking about, which is shown to solve the regional transportation issues for much less money, and I don't want to derail that effort either, but I think one day we will have passenger rail on that CSX line, and I'm looking forward to it, but as you said, that's a long-term, and we have a short-term, and we shouldn't not focus on the short-term as well.
Excellent, excellent comments. Anyone else? Ms. Long?
So while we're having this broader discussion, I have a loud voice anyway. Thank you. I do think that it would be a worthwhile exercise to explore a little more, what's the right word I'm searching for, futuristic and opportunities that exist with other entities besides CSX, because when I think CSX, I think of the antiquated heavy rail with big cars, and nobody's doing that so much anymore unless you're doing Amtrak up and down and across the country. And there are new technologies that are making these projects not only more nimble, but a lot more efficient in terms of the fuel cost. And without raising the ugly elephant in the room, I do want, before we go forward with this big, broad, long-term discussion, to know that we have honest brokers at the table who are willing to have a conversation. It was only a month or two ago that there was a woman at the podium who said that one of our partners was not ready to have a conversation yet. And we've been trying to have that conversation for 50 years. So I would like to know that we have a commitment to have a conversation to talk about these issues that we all care so deeply about.
Thank you for those comments, because I think to the Secretary's point is we do need to speak with one voice, and we do need to actually understand all the options and the issues. So the advantage of the workshop was to really just learn and then explore and really make sure we are considering not only the issues, but also the opportunities. And I think that would be a more transparent, robust conversation. Not that we would, a workshop, we don't vote at workshops. We listen and learn and then discuss. And that's what the beauty of having the Secretary's offer to help with doing these workshops is a real opportunity to explore those conversations and see how it fits with what else is on our unfunded priority list in terms of the staging of a development that would take a much longer term. Ms. Alden.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I have a flashing green light on this, and I'm not sure what that means. Okay, thank you. So, yes, the woman at the podium was me. And the reason why I said to the T-BARTA board that we're not ready to have that conversation is because ultimately the conversation comes back to how do we come up with that local match and how do we pay for ongoing operations. And we don't have that answer sorted out in Hillsborough. We are having a very active conversation about our unfunded transportation needs. And we're gonna need to get through that conversation before we can productively interact with you all about what a larger regional investment might look like. So you all have also asked over the years, who is in charge? Who is leading this or that effort, particularly with regional transit? And the way that our priorities are framed right now is that we would support HART's exploration and negotiation for use of the CSX right-of-way. I don't think that's a bad way to frame this, because as Commissioner Mariano stated, you probably have to, if you're going to create a regional system, you probably have to start near the center and then build outwards. And so it probably makes sense for HART to be the leader of that particular project. They also, as an agency, have a record of decision on an environmental impact statement for rail on one of the CSX corridors. So they are, already have a stake in one of these rail segments. HART is going through a strategic plan process. You'll notice we do not have a representative from HART here at the table today. HART has some house cleaning to do. And they're going to have to get through that process of getting their house in order before they can talk about larger regional strategic projects. And so that's my second reason for saying we need to take a little bit more time with this topic. We want to have a conversation with you about regional connections, about transit as part of our regional connections. I cannot represent agencies that aren't ready to come to the table yet.
Madam Chair, as a point of clarification, some of us in this room who have been deeply involved in the legislative process may remember a gentleman by the name of Bill Sadowski. Bill Sadowski had some very poignant comments that he made years ago, and one that stuck in my brain was, a good idea is a good idea, even if it comes from a scoundrel. So listen to them. If you have a problem, you don't need a solution in order to have a conversation, because having a conversation with your partners could very well open up to you some new ideas to help you find those funding solutions. If you just put a brick wall that says, we want to come up with our own solution, that doesn't help the entire group move along with you. So I clearly understand Ms. Alden's point of view. My point is, in order to move past 50 years of we're not ready yet, at some point we have to be willing to listen. And I'm sorry if I sound, I'm not mad, I'm frustrated with this bull, you know what. Thank you.
To that point, and to Ms. Alden's comment, because I do sit on the HART board, and she is correct. HART is in the process of reinventing itself in many, many ways. The new CEO is doing a remarkable job of really assessing what their SWOT is, what that looks like. And they have engaged in the process of developing, for the first time in the history of the agency, a strategic plan. Not the transportation planning, the process through the federal process, but a true strategic plan that is due to return to the board and to the community in December of next year, if I'm not mistaken. So it's not premature to have those conversations, because if we don't, and as a region, agree, as Secretary Gwynn has asked us to consider, because it really benefits in the funding decisions, to agree in what is our long-range vision for transit and transit service as partners in this process. Their strategic plan may not be as productive as it could be. So to your point, I think it is time to have the conversation, not with, you know, the nuts and bolts at the moment, or whether or not we have the funding this year, next year, or 2 years from now. But if we know what we're looking for, at least we can go get it, right?
Amen.
So that was my goal in the workshop process, is not to necessarily have all the nuts and bolts figured out, but to really prioritize how that regional solution fits within all of our respective areas, so that we can work individually and collectively on best solutions for getting people around. So I mean, I agree with you that I think we need to really recognize that, yeah, we may not be ready today. We don't have the funding at a local level, period, in Hillsborough County. But we won't ever if we don't help people understand why we do. And so my goal is to get us there. But that doesn't mean we can't have this conversation so that we can work in our own worlds to make it happen. Mr. Eggert, and then I'll call on you, Mr.
Yeah, this is twice in one meeting and would agree with Commissioner Long. It's starting to make me a little bit nervous. I'm kidding. But I do think that this long-term conversation, the vision that you talked about, and having that discussion today is important. Commissioner Starkey made the comment that we can't lose sight of those small incremental steps. What I call small, they're not small, they're big incremental steps along the way to getting us to make progress. I try to think of communities that were built one block at a time, as opposed to, and they actually got done, and after 10 years it was like, wow, look what we have. So we can't lose sight of that, and I want to make sure we keep these priorities grounded in reality and grounded in with our partner that feels that the timing is right. But I do think that conversation, that long-term visioning, has merit on many fronts. One of which is to start to have the conversation to bring our residents along, because we all have different issues in our counties about matching funding and having a solution for that, and again, bringing reality to our residents so that they understand what it's all about and what it means, and for their kids or their grandkids or whatever, is more important to me. Because I really think fundamentally was the problem with our effort some years ago. It wasn't necessarily grounded in the reality that people could either picture or were communicated. So for us to have those conversations that are at 30,000 feet or whatever, however you want to describe it, I think are really critically important, and we need to start having them. So I totally agree, and I think that would be a good idea to have that workshop to start putting those pieces together and see what it looks like. But I'm also probably a little more practical than some, but I want to keep our projects, our 5 projects, at the forefront, or 4 other projects at the forefront too. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Mariano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to echo the sentiments of Commissioner Stark. BRT, I think, is very important. It's very affordable. I think it's doable to get it done short term. The long term, the spine of the CXX rail, I think, is going to be the key for everything. I just came back from a trip from Switzerland. The rail line runs right through the cities. They run right alongside trails where people can have bike trails, et cetera, that people can ride their bike, walk, whatever they want to go do to transport themselves. They have a lot of bicycles, like tricycles, where they have stuff loaded up to go back and forth. So I think that rail line is just more than even just basic transportation, but it can provide other amenities out there as well that would really make it a special place, this whole region. So I think it's something we need to go after. I'm not sure what's going on with Hart exactly and how it's going to get resolved or what's going on with it, but with the number 5 up there to support Hart's exploration, I think we could have all the MPOs there in that mix as well. To keep it simpler, maybe if we just have DOT there, because if DOT is at the table with Hart as they explore, in case something comes up where, okay, let's go talk about the Pasco-Fernando line, let's go talk about the Oldsmar-St. Pete line, DOT can be their position to say, let's talk about that, without disrupting the core start of what's going on. As long as it's going to take, it'll help us all build. And if it's going to be, we've got 2 years from now, we've got our Penny for Pasco coming up again for renewal. If we make progress in 2 years, we could get back in 2 years to say, okay, let's go take a portion of that directed just for this. And that'd be a substantial source funding, wouldn't be raising taxes, but it would be something to help with. And then 10 years from there, we could say, okay, now we really like what's going on, we want to participate even more to be part of it. Now we're gonna go either add more of it or, you know, do something else with it to pass another referendum. So there could be options there, but it's gonna take time and to see something happening.
Sure.
To get our citizens to get behind it every step of the way. But I think once we see progress, once we see everything working together with what can happen, I think we can build this to make it go.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any other comments, Ms. Starkey?
Well, since we can talk here without sunshine issues, I've had the conversation with our county administrator about the funding for the BRT, and that we just need to be ready and be planning for it so that when it comes, we're not surprised. And we probably need to have this conversation, you know, at the board sometime, Jack. But we do have the ability to be squirreling away some transit money, some TIF money. You know, we just did that little tweak in our on the numbers that we're collecting, and so some are freeing up. And I think we are gonna start looking at putting away some money so we're ready to meet our obligations on the BRT when the time comes. So. Okay. And then long term with the penny, we can be focusing on what we need to participate in the rail. But that, I agree, that's a long term. I mean, that's a great corridor. Would we be buying the corridor, or would we just be buying the opportunity to use the line? Lots of questions.
That's part of the reason why a workshop is necessary.
Yeah.
You know, I think what it does is it helps us understand all the puzzle pieces, and then what our options are, so that we don't get stuck on, you know, we have to buy it versus we can negotiate a solution that works best for not only CSX because they own the right-of-way, but also, you know, the agency that needs and the entity that needs to partner with them. And that's why I wanted to make sure that was more clear. The workshop wouldn't necessarily be, okay, this is what we're gonna do. The workshop is to really explore all the options so that each of us are clear about how we could prioritize, how the option for passenger rail, using that right-of-way, fits within our overall transportation-related strategy. So it's not, are we going to move one project or another? But I think it's critically important that we have that discussion at this level, since the partners are all here. So I can't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense to be able to talk about it, because you can't really plan without knowing what your options are. And I'm all for anytime we can get together and talk about what the options are, you can make a better plan. And, you know, this whole intermodal thing is changing so quickly now. I mean, there's so many other options besides, you know, than what we thought about 10 years ago when Greenlight came to Pinellas. I mean, and you're right, there could be technologies that come up, but we need to be talking about it now, because it is a long-range plan. If we put that off to talk about it, it's going to be just that much further into the future. So I think we ought to really look forward to the workshop and everybody putting their heads together and listening to what our options are.
Excellent. So not hearing a motion to move forward on establishing a partnership with FDOT to have that workshop. Mr. Secretary, do you have a recommendation at this point for the board to consider?
Well, so we had offered up earlier perhaps putting together a workshop that discusses kind of the realm of possibilities, as well as show some examples of projects that, you know, did actually reach the operations stage. Sunrail being one example, but there's others around the country to show what are the decision points, what are the agreements that would perhaps need to be made between different agencies, what would hopefully raise the profile of the project to a point where we could get the legislature to take action, because that would be part of, it would require legislative approval. There's a lot of good things we can, if we had a smaller working group we could work with to come up with, craft the agenda to make sure that we're covering the areas that everybody would like to see covered. some of the decisions are as simple as, what mode are we really talking about? Are we talking about a commuter rail, or are we talking about something different? Because, that also plays into, are you buying the line? Are you leasing? Are you coming up with some sharing agreements? And CSX will talk to us, but based on our experience, until you really have something, they're a private business. They're at the end of the day, they're gonna wanna protect their shareholders and make money for their company and protect their interests. So you mentioned they're not gonna play all their cards either until you get to the point where you know really what you are asking for. So we'll get some good conversation with them, but I'll say until we know mode and longer-term plan, they also won't sell us, they said they won't sell you the part of their arm between the elbow and the shoulder, and they have no use for the rest of the arm, right? So, for instance, the line up to Brooksville, if you were to purchase a piece of it in Hillsborough County, that doesn't really help them. So there's a lot of questions like that we could talk about, share information, and then hopefully over time develop a strategy.
Okay, excellent. So, temperature in the room, do I have a motion to move forward on planning out a workshop for us to discuss
So moved.
as an option?
Second.
Okay, so, motion by Mr. Albert, second by Ms. Long. We don't think we need a roll call. Everybody in agreement?
Yes.
Okay,
Good.
all right, great. We'll work with your office to try and find a time for all of us to get together. I would recommend that we have the transit agencies present so that they're at the table, as well as Tubarta, as I think they
share that request with the CEO.
And share, I'm sorry?
Maybe you could share that request with the CEO of HART.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Well, that will definitely be my next phone call.
Thank you.
Because I think it would be beneficial for all of us to really explore this, because there is, more opportunities possibly for funding that we do not want to miss out on, even though this problem or this opportunity may not manifest for a couple of years. I think having that visioning is critically important. So thank you very much for that conversation. Unless there's any other items that we need to discuss regarding the priorities, is there any other?
Well, since you asked, and my partner in crime over here is saying, oh, God.
Someone just opened that door.
I'm looking at the time frame here, we could move right along.
Okay, well, if you don't want to hear my...
No, go right ahead, I recognize you.
Thank you. So, while several years ago, we had this conversation, I think it would be an interesting exercise, since over time, folks sitting here change, leadership changes, the climate changes. We're talking about regional transportation for 8 counties. Out of those 8 counties, my understanding from my other partner over here on my left is we have 6 MPOs. If you look at the chart, and my partner over here had one some time ago, which I understand has been updated, is that correct?
Not legally.
No? Okay, well, here we go. If you look at the chart of the entire United States, and you pinpoint those systems where they have put in place a really robust public transportation system, they have maybe 20 counties, 1 MPO that speaks for the entire region. And so I think it would be a worthwhile conversation about what that might look like for Tampa Bay. Because if you look at Atlanta, help me out here, some of the other regions, like what we've talked about this before.
Right. Dallas, Atlanta, a lot of those are councils of government that do more than just transportation.
Okay, well, we're talking about the future and maybe doing what you've always done. If you want different results, maybe it's time to rethink how we're doing things and why we've been so stuck, for 50 years trying to figure this out.
Okay.
Just saying.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Is that a recommendation or a motion or
Well, I'm not
or
hearing
do
any
you just want to have
conversation.
it for discussion for a future
Well, we
item?
can talk about it at a future date, but I do think it is one of the biggest stumbling blocks for us to move forward.
Understood.
Because we have, it's a very diverse area with very diverse people and opinions and so on and so on. We all know the obstacles, but in my mind, if you want to move forward, it's important to address those obstacles so that you know what you're dealing with.
Understood.
Well, we have had, I mean, I know that with leadership from Tallahassee has oftentimes recently suggested that we had one NPO for at least 3 counties. I don't know that they ever talked about it for the 8 counties, but nonetheless, the idea has certainly been floated that, you know, and we've had some of those discussions, and there's value to keeping our NPOs the way they are. There's value to having a regional TMA like we have. There's lots of value in the different groups that we have, but, you know, I'd be open to having the conversation, but I just don't know what kind of traction we're even getting for a 3-county MPO, much less 8. But
May I just add a few
Mr. Vine.
things? We did have this conversation pretty recently, 2018, and there is a full report that's available that outlines that, and the ultimate recommendation was to actually merge the MPOs by 2030. Or at least consider merging by 2030. I forget exactly how it's worded. Yeah, the core MPOs, but I think that's a conversation that can happen. I also want to say, though, that merging the MPOs is not going to address the real elephant in the room, which is the funding issue, the local funding commitment. Under Florida law, MPOs can't do a thing for operating funding for transit. Counties are the only entity that can raise revenue for local funding for transit, things like that. The MPOs can speak effectively with one voice, so to your point, you're not wrong. But I think we have a high level of coordination now. I think we have the ample opportunity to advance any concepts with the structure we have today. It could be perhaps more efficient and could be more regionally minded under one organization, but it's not addressing the fundamental impediments we have now, which is really the funding issue. And that's a conversation that can happen. So, you know, this may be part of a strategy in coming years, but I don't want it to get in the way of productive dialogue now between the entities in the structure we're in now, if that makes sense to everybody.
I accidentally turned off your mic. I
Oh,
apologize.
okay.
But
I did. I swear to God, it was an accident.
Exactly what.
Trying not to cough in the mic while you were speaking. I apologize. No, I think I hear each of you, and I think there is, again, some collaborative conversation we can have on solution finding for the issues that you bring up. And maybe we'll add that to a future discussion for after we have the workshop. So,
Madam Chair,
yes.
can I just talk about that for a second? So I think the TMA structure is great. It's brought us to the table for the first time in a cohesive group, balanced out, I think, very well, for a lot of good discussions, a lot of good recommendations, and I think it's helping with our regional success of getting the funding. I think for the long term, if we can get to, let's say, the BRT, and let's say start this rail line thing, that could lead to that conversation of that merge coming together. And I think we need to get some success from this group, getting some stuff done to say, look, here's what we've started, but now to come together with the funding, we all need to pull them together as one. If we join as a group, then we can then isolate other areas that have done it. I think it's an easier sell to bring it all together at that point.
Thank you very much for
Yeah,
those comments.
have a plan and then go out for the funding.
Yeah, exactly. And structurally, how we organize to meet these kinds of initiatives, I think, is important. I don't think we can't get there with the structure we have now, but I would be willing to have at least that conversation that we did have last year to see if in the process of moving forward many of our priorities, if, reevaluating that conversation in the future might be valuable. Again, especially if we find ourselves with some major regional coordination that is going to require some cohesive actions together.
And if I could just add, just a reminder that we did amend the bylaws to incorporate the TMA as a subcommittee of the larger Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance that we rebranded. So you all have voting ability. The CCC, now Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance, doesn't make recommendations that go back to the MPOs for them to ratify. They make the final decision. This TMA Leadership Group, as a subcommittee that under the bylaws, is empowered to be the final decision maker on regional priorities. So a lot has changed since 2018.
Right.
When that report came, we've strengthened the regional structure, and there's some additional steps that we talked about at our last meeting in terms of communication, messaging, getting out to the public, that, because MPOs tend to be really behind the scenes, not front and center entities, but if we can elevate our game a little bit, I think we can both speak to the legislature more effectively and communicate to the public that there is a group of people who come together to think long-term and think about the needs of the greater region, and that's what you're empowered to do.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, sir. Any other comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Excellent. Thank you. Next on the agenda, and thank you all for the comments. I think it's critically important that we do this, and I look forward to working with the Secretary on getting that workshop on the queue and getting it scheduled soon. Ms. Alden, you're addressing flexibility and transportation funding.
Thank you. And to your point, we should be turning over every rock to find funding for our transit systems. Last year, we had a conversation about funding that's allocated by the Florida legislature and how that's being utilized. We talked about that it is largely a zero-sum game. There's a certain amount of funding from the state of Florida that comes to our geographic area, and when we ask for earmarks, those projects get funded off the top, and then the remainder of the funding is available to address the priorities that we've all looked at, talked about extensively often, hashed out with the public and so forth. And so last year, this group supported a position statement asking for expanded funding for transit rather than just shuffling dollars around. And we had some specific suggestions about how that might happen. And so what I would like to do today is to report back to you some good news that some of the things that we asked for last year are on the way or have happened. And so one of the things that we asked for was allowing bus rapid transit to be an eligible expense under Chapter 341 of Florida statutes. That would help potentially with operational funding. So for example, we saw earlier, Secretary mentioned Sunrail, and that was funded in the first 7 years of operations were funded for Sunrail. And so we talked about that as, is there an option for that also to apply to BRT? We talked about the funding that the state sets aside for the strategic intermodal system. And is there a way for that to help address some of our transit priorities? We asked to make transit an eligible and prioritized use of the funding allocated to the SIS. And so there's been some progress on both of those fronts. And I also want to share with you something new in the Florida New Starts Grant Program. So the Florida New Starts Grant Program we've talked about for a long time, how you put together a package of dollars to fund the construction of a major transit project, and how often that is, there's an opportunity for that to be partly Federal Transit Administration through their capital investment grant program, and then matched by state and local dollars. And the Florida New Starts Grant Program was created to match the local dollars 1-for-1. So previously, the requirement was basically these dollars, the Federal New Starts Grant Program is here really to be that match when you're going for that FTA capital investment grant. And if you're not going to go through that FTA capital investment grant process, the state is willing to contribute 12.5% of the cost of the project, with the remainder coming from the local share. DOT has just recently announced a new path forward for these projects that are eligible for the capital investment grant process. But if we decide not to go through that FTA process, which can be time consuming, the state is now willing to use the Florida New Starts Grant Program to still match our local dollars 1-for-1. So it would basically be a 50-50 split between the state and the local level on the construction costs, if you don't want to go through that FTA capital investment grant process. And that's what, I know this is a lot of complicated stuff, give you an ice cream headache looking at this slide, but basically option 2 at the bottom of the slide is laying out the process for this. And basically what it's identifying is that a project can go through a PD&E process kind of in place of that federal capital investment grant development process. It still has to qualify, still has to be the same types of transit investments that would qualify for FTA. There has also been, and I see people looking at me. Brad, do you need to correct anything that I'm saying? Secretary Gwynn, anything that I'm misstating here, or I could ask you at the end after I go through a couple other things as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Okay, so another recent announcement is Florida DOT is providing some new flexibility on supporting operations. So, with the Sunrail project getting that operational support, there is an opportunity for DOT district dedicated revenue to be used for up to 5 years of operations for a major transit project like this. The share borne by DOT would decline over the 5 years. I think it starts at 80% and drops to 20% in the last year. But this gets us closer to that request that we had of having some kind of additional assistance for operations for these major projects. The process for this is that we should identify this on our TIP priority lists. And the downside that I shared with my board is that District 7 is currently using district dedicated funds for a lot of other things that are on our priority list. And we have safety projects at the top of our priority list. So that's why I've got this comment here. District 7 is currently using district dedicated revenue to build Vision Zero projects. That's true in our county because that's consistent with our priorities. So we just need to be cognizant that again, the limited pot of funds, where are our priorities in this? And so then the third thing that I wanted to bring to you is some new flexibility with the Strategic Intermodal System program. And this is just proposed flexibility at this point. So the priorities for the Strategic Intermodal System are reevaluated every 5 years as DOT prepares a policy plan. Following the policy plan, DOT will identify projects that they'd like to fund over the next couple of decades. That list of projects then becomes an input to our long-range transportation plan updates. So this is a process that's going to play out over the next few years. So the policy plan for the Strategic Intermodal System is an opportunity for us to have a conversation with DOT about what we think, what we see as the top priorities for SIS facilities and what we would like considered. There are 5 focus areas in this year's update of the policy plan: safety, resilience, technology and innovation, urban mobility and connectivity, which is good for us, of course, because we're urbanized areas, and rural mobility and connectivity. So just a couple of things that I bring to your attention on the ideas for improving safety. One of the things that they're identifying is providing more flexibility to include safety features as part of strategic intermodal system capacity projects. So our board looked at this and was very supportive of this, asked that DOT consider developing a Vision Zero action plan for the strategic intermodal system. We also looked at the ideas for improving urban mobility and connectivity. So one of the statements here on the screen is prioritize projects that improve interregional travel on the strategic intermodal system, including multimodal travel options between Florida's large urban areas. And so that's a step in the right direction. It does, in our minds, I think what, immediately jumped to mind was like a connection, like a, rapid rail connection from Orlando to Tampa. Would that be part of the strategic intermodal system? But isn't it worthwhile, if it is a priority to invest in our urban areas as a critical component of our state's economy, that we also look at regionally significant transit as part of the strategic intermodal system? And so our board, in making comments on this, it's part of our letter that we approved earlier this week, asked that regionally significant transit be considered as a part of the SIS, including corridors as well as hubs. That's what's being designated on the SIS right now. It's hubs. So like on Sunrail, there are 5 stations that are identified as part of the SIS. That's it. So making it a better integrated part of our strategic intermodal system. So there is a letter of comment that we drafted that I have shared in the packet, and we'd be happy to prepare one on behalf of the TMA Leadership Group if that's of interest to this group, or perhaps you would like to take that back to your own boards and discuss that further. But it is, I think, an exciting time to be looking at these new changes coming from Florida DOT, and they do seem very interested in our comments. So I just encourage everybody to participate in that process. And I'm going to come back now to, should I start with Secretary Gwynn first? Any comments or corrections on what I just
No,
what I just said?
and this is still evolving. I mean, we're really taking a hard look at mobility as a holistically. Highways are a part of that, but obviously we have other modes and other ways that we can promote mobility. We're also looking at how we can make more flexibility in the funds. The one thing to remember is that it doesn't always mean there's more funds. It just means you have the ability to put them on different things. So, it may be that you move something to transit, but you may have to take it away from another area if the total pot doesn't grow. So, but we found that in some parts of the state and even some parts of our district, you go to Miami and there's not very many roads left to widen down there. So for them, they really are forced to look at other types of mobility options. Pinellas County is at some point going to run out of facilities to widen. And so this is evolving, but I think the department is very much receptive to looking at other options more than we may have been in the past.
Brad?
Okay.
Mr. Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Beth, for putting this together. I think it is good. I think my questioning through my mask was, I had seen this presentation previously too, and I thought, at least my takeaway was that it didn't seem of much value to go through the option 2, no federal funding for a rail or a rapid transit project, because now the Florida DOT was mimicking the same fairly intensive process that the federal government uses for scoring your project and evaluating it, even if you are going for just state dollars. And I thought, but I'm hopeful that you are correct and I'm wrong, that the state's matching funds would still be capped at a max of 25% of the full project. But I'm hopeful that you're right, and you could do a 50-50 project just with state and local. I don't know, Secretary Gwynn, if you know the answer to that.
Yes, so I'm gonna trust
Secretary Gwynn, could you turn your mic on, sir? Thank you.
Is it on now?
It's on
Okay.
now.
So I'm gonna trust best numbers on there. I'd have to verify with Ming, who's not here today, to just, I know there's been discussions back and forth. The one thing, though, I would mention that, you know, even if we don't go for federal money, if we're looking at a project that's a phased project, we probably want to follow the federal process anyway, so that if we have a future project that we want to expand, we could use the money that was invested in the first project as our match towards a future project. So part of the reason I think we're trying to mimic the federal process is so that we don't lose the opportunity in the future to use that investment to leverage a bigger federal investment.
And thank you very much for putting together these recommendations on the SIS projects. I think that'll be helpful. I know that this is still a work in progress at the DOT, and so I think having some comments from locals, I've been trying to put together some comments. So these are helpful.
Okay, great. Other questions or comments?
Just one.
Ms. Blunt.
These points and recommendations in your letter are very consistent with what we've talked about at the Pinellas MPO in terms of, did I just say Pinellas MPO? Ford Pinellas, you know, for flexible funding, and we've been advocating for that, and that's consistent with our board's policy. Would you be receptive to taking this letter and putting it on SCTPA letterhead and doing it that way if the members here would agree? Because I think all these points we would wholeheartedly support, and speaking on behalf of my members but it is very consistent with our adopted policy positions.
Excellent.
I think that would be helpful to have a letter on the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance letterhead, potentially signed by the chair of the TMA, if that's of interest to this group.
Right. I'd love to get a read from the rest of the members to get your comments. Mr. Mariano?
I think it'd be a great idea, and I just want to put a plug in for Secretary Gwynn. Your leadership, your expertise, and why you do things is phenomenal, as always. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be very good, and it gets our new name out there as well.
Excellent. I like that idea as well. Okay. Any other comments, questions, requests? Do I have a motion to ask that a letter of comment be approved by this body and supported? All right. And a second by Mr. Mariano. All approved?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. If you'll assist us in putting together that letter of comment signed under that stationery, that would be excellent.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have other questions or comments that need to be addressed? Anyone else? Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Alden. Next item on the agenda, we're ready, is the federal infrastructure bill, and Mr. Blanton.
All right, well, good morning. I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. This may not be a lot of news for some of you. I gave this presentation to our legislative committee. I'm the president-elect of APA, so I feel like I can appropriate their slides with impunity. We do have a planners advocacy network that's been pretty instrumental in galvanizing a lot of support for this Senate infrastructure bill, which is very planner-friendly, very MPO-friendly, and builds on probably 2 decades of evolution of giving MPOs more voice, more power, more authority in making funding decisions on behalf of the region. The federal process, there's a 2-track legislative process. There's the 5-year surface transportation reauthorization, and then there is supplemental infrastructure funding. That is apart those are the components of this bipartisan infrastructure bill. So it's significantly more funding, but it's also more funding over a 5-year surface transportation authorization. The current status of this bill is that it has passed the Senate. It is pending action in the House. The word is that the House is likely to not substantially change the Senate bill. And while some were advocating, and the House has passed previous versions that were radically different in terms of federal priorities and changing the funding formula, moving away from the gas tax more aggressively and doing things like that. This is probably just more money on traditional programs with a few new programs added. And this just covers some of the other earlier bills that were passed. The House passed this INVEST Act that I mentioned that was substantially different in terms of how the federal government approaches transportation, and that was not included in the conference. So most of those provisions will go away. In addition, the House is the only chamber that included legislative earmarks, and many of us were successful in getting some of those earmarks into the House bill. That was not taken up by the Senate. There are no earmarks in the Senate. So if you have earmarks, they may or may not, they probably won't happen in the reconciliation.
Is that only on transportation or?
Only on transportation, as part of this transportation bill.
We had one for Ridge Road.
Yep. Now, something could change to have that in the final negotiation, but the word is that may not be likely. So the infrastructure bill is building on the base program under the FAST Act, which is currently the law of the land. It was extended by another year through September 30th of this year. And what I think is kind of cool about all this is we have these core formula programs that have gotten significantly more money under this Senate bill. And then there's some new programs. The carbon reduction is new. The PROTECT Act is new. And there's some key grant programs here, a couple of which are new as well. So I'm just going to highlight some of these. The main gist of this, and this is all in your packet, by the way, if you'd rather follow along there, is that there's this $550 billion in additional. So there's a 32% increase over FY20 in core planning funding for 5 years. So all the MPOs around the country are going to get a lot more money to undertake project development and corridor planning and safety planning and trail planning and all those kinds of programs. There is an increase in the amount of Transportation Alternatives Program funding, the TAP program that will go to MPOs. That sub-allocation amount goes from 50 to 59%, and what that means is there's more dollars for MPOs to control versus money that's controlled by the states, for instance. And there's also no longer a physical cap, and maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, on that Transportation Alternatives Program. It is now a percentage of the total amount. So there is, as the dollar amount rises for surface transportation funding, it also rises for Transportation Alternatives Program. And that's something we've been advocating for many, many years. It's finally happened. We always had a hard number cap. It also makes it harder for that money to go back and revert to the states. So once that money is allocated, the states now have, and Florida's been really good about this. We haven't had a problem in Florida, but if you live and work in Missouri or South Carolina or North Carolina or many other states, the states have taken that money back from MPOs if it wasn't spent fast enough, and sometimes even if they were spending it, they would take that money back and repurpose it. This makes it harder for them to do that. There is, for the first time ever, a climate program that hopefully will be adopted into law, increased resilience focus, support for electric vehicles. There's a new $6.4 billion formula program and grant funding for carbon reduction, which speaks to a lot of the issues we were talking about earlier today in terms of transportation. The PROTECT Act is a resilience program that includes about $1.4 billion for a competitive grant program and a dedicated $140 million set aside specifically for planning. So that ties into the work that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is doing. It ties into the work that a lot of our local governments are already doing on resilience. And again, paired with transportation, you can really do a lot now with resilience and transportation funding. There's money for electric vehicles in a formula program for the first time, $2.2 billion in new competitive grant program to build out alternative fuel corridors and electric charging stations, which is consistent with a lot of what the Florida legislature is interested in. And that's now eligible through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. I got a little ahead of myself, but this is the bike and pedestrian program. Again, it is now 10% of the Surface Transportation Block Grant. The sub-allocation is increased. It gives smaller MPOs a little bit more of a voice when they have less than 200,000 population. There's some other things here that relate to rural transportation as well. And micromobility, bike share, which many of you are dealing with at the local government level, is now eligible under certain programs. There is a new safety program, and I'm really excited about this. There is now potentially a federal Vision Zero program with a Safe Streets and Roads for All component that has a $400 million set aside for local Vision Zero planning. So that will augment the work that's underway in Hillsborough and Pinellas, Pasco, and Sarasota, Manatee, and many of our other counties around the region. There's also new housing coordination plans that will help MPOs and local governments improve that critical link between housing and transit and jobs access. There's an 11-fold increase in rail funding with $666 billion, including $12 billion for non-Amtrak intercity rail projects. Again, this money is not like immediately available in year one. It's going to be spread out over a 5-year authorization. But that gives, I think, us time to set the stage for this. And then the nice thing about federal legislation like this is it usually gets built upon in successive rounds of reauthorization. So once it's in, it's really hard to get it out, and that's something that we can hopefully will continue. There's a lot more funding in this bill for the RAISE and infra grants, which are incredibly popular. Many of you may have submitted a letter. I know we just participated with PSTA on a letter for the RAISE grant. That program, whether it was Build or Tiger and now RAISE, has always been oversubscribed, underfunded relative to the demand by an order of magnitude that's huge. I think the first year of this program, I think they had about $2.5 billion of requests and only $500 million. The money has gone up, but the amount of demand has also gone up as well. There's a new transportation equity program with an established equity focus included in the core programs for planning. So to Commissioner Long's point, she says this at almost every meeting, if you're not talking about equity and you're not talking about resilience, you're probably not getting funding. And that's a nice thing that's being continued through this bipartisan infrastructure bill. There's $1 billion for reconnecting communities, which would address some of the highway barriers that have been built along some of our communities that separated communities of color, for instance, and we have that issue throughout the Tampa Bay region. $1 billion is not a lot, and the original version in the House had a lot more money in that program, but it is something, and it is something that we could potentially pursue. And I mention all these because all of these are competitive programs. And like we've heard with the RAISE grant and Build before that, when you coalesce your energy across jurisdictions and you speak with one voice as a region, you can be very successful going after these programs. But if we're all going after these programs, it may be that we don't get anything. And they do look for regional support. So in Pinellas, we've decided that if there's a RAISE grant, we're only going to support one for our county. And last year we had 2, and that was a mistake, and nobody got any money. Hopefully, we've all galvanized behind PSTA's request, and they'll get funding this year. But I think that philosophy, even for some of these programs, could elevate to the TMA level if we find projects that are on our unfunded priority list that we want to go after. Infra would be a really good one for that, as would the RAISE program.
Madam Chair?
Could you hold 1 second, Commissioner Matt?
If you could just go back, just because it's the biggest topic we've had, go back to the increased support for transit and rail.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Right.
So $12 billion for non-Amtrak intercity projects. I'm just wondering if we as a region shouldn't try to jump on that, for what we're trying to do right now. I mean, of all the things I'm looking at, talking about a region sticking together, yeah. And now that we have our own federal lobbyist, I know it's the same, I think, as Pinellas County, and I'm sure you guys have your own, or 2 or 3. That may be something to go after as far as a region goes in one shot, as the largest chunk to really get this thing jump-started.
So now you have some understanding why I want to have this workshop? Because I honestly, to be able to capitalize on that new, relatively new element of transportation funding on a federal level, I think it is critically important for us to really look at how this area could benefit from that kind of funding that historically has not been as robust. So I appreciate that. Sir, you're recognized.
And I would like to echo what Whit was just saying about having that unified voice from the region. I know we've talked about it, but I cannot emphasize that enough. In some of these competitive grants, Florida has not done well, and I'd like to see our future change to where we are exceptionally competitive. And I would love to see us all unify behind one grant, the following year unify behind another one. And I'd like to change Florida's picture in bringing federal funds here, because I think it's far preferable to use federal funds than to go after your state funds.
Secretary Glenn, you're recognized.
Just remember that part of the competitiveness of this is going to be the local contribution and the state contribution. So it would be great for us to come together as a region and go after a project, but we're also going to, there's so much competitive grant money in these new bills that, but to take advantage of it, we will need it to show what we're going to throw into the game.
Thank you, Secretary Glenn.
And to that point, you know, one thing, by having a federal program that essentially just adds more money on the programs that already existed under the FAST Act, they're not changing the fundamental nature of the federal relationship to transit agencies, which since, Beth, was it the 1980s, maybe the 70s, the federal government does not participate in operational funding for larger urban areas.
Right.
And so the operating dollars, the maintenance dollars still are completely on the local governments with a little bit of, you know, help from the state, but it's not a lot from the state.
Okay, excellent. Ms. Long.
I think.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just one second.
The thought occurs to me that if we can, given that we put this workshop or whatever you were calling it together with the different counties, I think that conversation could well lead towards a new, more energized emphasis on making sure that our local match, that we were working towards finding that local match money. And the more we can discuss that on a regional level, the more we will get the attention of the feds, in my opinion.
I 100% agree.
We have not ever done that, and it's been 50 years. I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but come on.
In 5 more years, you'll be able to say 55 years.
Yes, exactly. No, I think.
Thank you for that, Wed.
Commissioner Long, I can't agree with you more, and I think that's to Mr. Blanton's presentation. Having a strong, not only strategic plan, but also financial plan for doing it, you know, stretching it out and determining how each of us work together on that financial plan to support the federal application process for our regional priorities, I think is a core success if we could make that as part of our planning process. So,
Question. Can that be used for planning, or is it construction, or, I mean, what's the realm of what that money can be used for?
So what we don't know are all the rules that will go with all these funding programs. So Congress is authorizing the funding programs, but then there are going to be some rules that will be made to provide that sort of framework. But there is a lot more money for planning in this bill as well that can be used for a whole host of things that set you up for the construction dollars.
So if we were going for a unified plan, is it a TBARTA ask? Is it a TMA or whatever we are ask? Where does the money go? Does it go to one place? You know, how does that?
I think there's a lot of flexibility here. You know, the way we're structured now with our setup, I think any one of the MPOs could be in a lead role to receive the funding. And then we could, I mean, we have a meeting this afternoon, you know, so the staff directors meet very often, and we could use that as a forum for collaborative planning, even if one MPO is the recipient of the money.
Why would it not go to TBARTA, that is our regional
That's also an option.
transit
Yeah,
planning?
that is an option.
So-
You know, TBARTA may not have its as clearly direct of a path, because TBARTA is a state-created agency and not a federal-created agency, so the federal government recognizes MPOs,
Oh.
and the dollars naturally flow to MPOs and states. But it doesn't mean that TBARTA can't be a recipient for some of these funds.
But wait a minute, with TBARTA is a designated recipient for federal dollars.
It still is different than being an MPO, but yes, they can receive FTA
I'm
funds.
saying, I think that these are the devil is always in the details, right?
Right.
Hence the need for a conversation.
Exactly. All right, well, thank you for
I'm
bringing
sorry,
that
I'm
up.
getting in the weeds. I
And
just
that,
was
no, and I
curious.
think this is an important distinction as these details evolve and it finally gets approved. I think we can have a productive planning conversation on
Yep.
who would be the best source or the best method of achieving the goals that we set within our planning.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mariano.
And I sit on the NACO Transportation Committee. I've been there for like 5-6 years. One of the things they talked about, Whit, you're right on the money, there's a lot of more money for planning. They're actually not calling them, they don't want to see the term shovel-ready anymore, because the shovel-ready projects weren't necessarily the best projects that were going forward. So they do want to see shovel-worthy projects.
Oh,
So
interesting.
tying into planning, tying into all this, I think if it makes sense, and maybe back to as far as the funding part goes, maybe it needs to be Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas on the list with FDOT/TBARTA, that we're all in this together to drive it through, to go look for that funding, maybe the ultimate way to go.
Understood. Any other comments before he moves on? Excellent. Sir, go ahead.
I think I can go ahead and wrap it up here. I've covered the main points, and you know, there's another whole budget reconciliation thing that's getting worked out that I really don't want to go into right now. So I think I've hit the high points. The message to me for this group is there's a lot of money coming down the pike. To Secretary Gwynn's point, it is still going to be contingent on your local match and being super competitive, which to Carl's point is, you know, we've got to speak with one voice. We've got to rally around key projects and let's go after it, because a lot of the money is in these competitive programs, and some of it's in the formula, and the formula is good, but the competitive ones are the ones that are transformative, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other comments before we move to the next agenda item? The only thing I wanted to say is, one, thank you very much for your presentation. I think it is, we do have, the formula and the relationships are morphing with the new federal sort of guidelines and opportunities. And I think we just need to do two things. One, work together on finding those opportunities, as Secretary Gwynn has reminded us on a regular basis. Speaking of one voice does certainly help. But I think working together on how to best pursue regional types of projects is important. And working together on how to best get that, I think, is critically important. Did you have a comment, Carl?
Just a quick one. I know we've talked about this at our statewide forum. Have they done anything to adjust the distribution of funding? I know that one of the issues at hand was that they were continuing the slice of the pie based upon 2000 census. Is that addressed in this bill, or has that been taken up in any of the discussions?
From what I recall hearing, that they are updating that from 2000 to 2010.
Which is the latest available.
Which is at least better, you know, yeah, because the fast-growing states were being penalized. But
Yes.
my understanding is that's still one of those contentious issues that, you know, Cleveland and Detroit and New York City are going to fight, right?
Yes.
So let's stay tuned on that. I don't think that's been hammered out.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So I think we have our marching orders to keep an eye on this, and then go back to not only our boards, but also our county board members to make sure that they're aware that the formula may be, some changes may occur, and that creates some opportunity for us to look at those regional opportunities at a federal level. Thank you very much for your report, sir. Okay, with that, our next item on the agenda, actually, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just a short point of order. I'd just like to say, because I was listening to the meeting on the way over here. I had a car issue. But Ms. LeGrand, the new CEO of Hart, was intending to come here, but had an emergency. So I just wanted to, I heard that that was part of the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you for that information. I appreciate that. You're still here.
Still here.
Okay. Sir, would you like to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons?
Right. Beth Alden and I had a conversation several weeks ago. She had had a discussion with Representative Toledo. I had had a conversation with Representative Cheney in Pinellas County. Both of them have been pretty passionate supporters of safety improvements in our respective counties, and both were opponents of the pedestrian safety bill that was filed by Representative Fine and Senator Perry last year and the year before that, which purports to improve pedestrian safety by removing one of the most effective tools in our safety toolbox, the mid-block crossing with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Everything we've heard is that that bill is coming back again this year. Representative Toledo suggested that we should act in September to draft a letter very clearly identifying our position that these are needed and important safety devices. So I volunteered to draft a letter. What you have in your packet is still a draft version of that letter. I'm still incorporating comments from Gina Torres at the Hillsborough TPO, from Lakeland, from St. Pete staff, from other staff at, I believe, Hillsborough County and City of Tampa. And but they're all around the margins. You know, the basic gist of the letter is not changing. And so what I'm asking today is for authorization for us to put this letter on SCTPA letterhead and to send the letter perhaps with Chairman Overman's signature. And then what I envisioned in the letter is having contacts such as myself, Beth, some of the technical experts in the field who can answer questions, maybe having Secretary Gwen as a contact if he feels comfortable with that, and get that letter out this month as committee meetings start. The other ask I would have is that you authorize us to complement that letter with a social media campaign highlighting the 4 points in the letter that these RRFBs largely are located in areas of inequity, where we have large communities that are underserved and disadvantaged that tend to be adjacent to our high-speed, busier roadways, which they would try to remove these devices from any road that's more than, say, 30 or 35 miles an hour. And while I think we could probably live with 35 miles an hour, there are a lot of roads that are 40 and 45 miles an hour that need safety devices, and I would like to, it may not be the RRFB, but there still may need to be a mid-block crosswalk. And some of the pushback on this is that we don't want to slow down car drivers for those people who are crossing the road. And you know, whatever the device is, I really want to make sure that we are able to ensure that people have equity and safe access to destinations in their community. That's one key point of the bill. The other is these things are super effective. Motorist compliance rates have gone from 18% without them to over 88 to 90% with them. And while no transportation solution is foolproof, these are incredibly successful. So that's my ask, and I'll open it up for any discussion there, and we'll have a revised letter probably in the next day or two.
Excellent. Any comments before we entertain a possible motion?
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree that we need to get out ahead of it. I guess my only thought is, again, as we continue to push this tool as a very vital, certainly for Pinellas County, whether it's in the beaches and some of the communities that you speak about, but really throughout, it's really going to be important that we continue to be very careful on our end how we implement them, because I can think of examples where it's clear cut that it doesn't work, and in fact we don't use it, like crossing State Road 580, which has got about 6 lanes. We don't use a flashing yellow. And then you have others that it's the same road but further down, where it's at the end of 580s, it's coming to a close, where we do use it. And then we have a situation where over on one of our roads, Sunset Point, where we put a new one in, where it really starts to beg the question, is that the right place and the right tool to use? So
Right.
I totally agree, this is a great tool. I never want to get rid of it, but I also want to make sure that we don't step out ahead of ourselves and do things that really would hurt that program. So just continuing to refine that look. But I would make the motion that we do provide this letter.
We have a motion by
Second.
Commissioner, and a second by Commissioner Long.
Got more discussion?
Any other discussion?
Yes.
Well,
Is that to the motion or to the question?
To the motion, yeah,
Okay.
discussion. So, having been rear-ended a couple of times, stoplights, they're dangerous. Traffic lights, what people aren't expecting, could cause injury and more accidents as well. I really, listen to Commissioner Starkey over the years talk about roundabouts, how safe they are, because people don't stop, they move around, and it's much safer. I've maybe gotten tuned to that. In a low-traffic area, I can support all the way. On a higher speed area, it's a little more dangerous, so we're using caution to that number.
There's a different device for a higher speed multi-lane road than these, to your point. The other thing is, I think some of these devices across the state, they were pioneered in Pinellas County. They started here. They're new in other parts of the state, and some of the cases where there's been complaints, they may not have been installed as well as they could have been with enough advance marking and things like that. Plus, drivers were less familiar with these because it was the first one. And I think that was maybe the case in Brevard County where we had a fatality that was tragic. But, we have over 300 of these things in Pinellas County, and the mandate from the legislature to, if you can't turn these lights red, which would require federal approval, then you have to remove them, would have been, a multi-million dollar, I forget the dollar amount, but we quantified it. It would be a huge impact statewide and to our county. So yes, to your point, Commissioner Mariano, there are better devices in different contexts than these. But for a 35, 40 mile an hour, 2 or 4 lane road, I think these can work effectively if they're marked and signed in advance.
Starkey, you were going
well, I'm glad that you clarified that, because we're getting ready to put some in, I think, on State Road 54. And we have people who are avoiding the crossing with the coast-to-coast trail and the Starkey Gap. They're avoiding all the one that we put in at the light, and they're going down to where we're going to put the mid-cross block in. And when the lights turn red, they're crossing there. I guess it'd be like J crossing, I don't know. Because they, even without having a system there, they feel it's safer than going through the intersection. So I thought that was very interesting. I just learned that. But I'm fully in support of these kind of devices. Yeah. I'm sorry you had one person who stepped out and got hit, but how many people got hit at the intersections?
Right.
When you're trying to cross and someone turns right or left into you, I bet that number's much higher. So I'm very much in support of this letter.
Any other comments before I ask for a vote? Ms. Alden, you recognize?
So the only thing that I would add to this conversation, this is a great conversation, and I really appreciate Whit putting the letter together. So the only thing that I would add was that Representative Toledo also suggested that if we consider this a letter writing campaign, it will be even more effective. So consider taking the letter back to your jurisdictions and letting everyone else know that this is important.
We have one on Starkey Boulevard.
Do we want to add that to the motion? No, I agree. I think there's a perfect place for these, and then there's obviously places that don't. So while I will support the motion to actually do a letter from this body, I do believe that it would be fair to make a recommendation that we get some best practice recommendations from our transportation professionals, so that inappropriate placement, is less likely, because having another tool in the toolbox to create an opportunity for safety, I think, is paramount in all of our regions. So with that, any other further discussion?
If I could just real quick.
Secretary, go ahead.
Thank you. So we've revised our policies at FDOT now. We do not allow for them to be installed on state roads above 35 mile an hour speed limit or more than 4 through lanes. And then we're also, though, using pedestrian hybrid beacons more often, which are more like a traditional signal that comes up red for stop. We put a bunch of them recently in on Bush Boulevard, a number of other roads. I think we put some in Pinellas County. And we've worked with the bill sponsors, and I'm actually hopeful, and I may not have the latest information, that they're not going to file bills this year. One of the things that we did do was work with Representative Fine. He really wanted to see the lights changed to red, which is not something we can do without FHWA approval. But we did petition FHWA to let us do a pilot project with the red lights to see whether it would be. We haven't heard back from FHWA, but we're hopeful that perhaps by us working with the former bill sponsors, showing them that we're making progress, that we're trying to find ways to make it better, we'll hold off the bills for this year. But it's always good to be prepared.
Thank you. I mean, I think we all have roads in our community that, you know, are posted at 40 or 45 that we all know is probably not a good idea. And if a beacon at 35 gets us there, you know, what the specs and where we go with this, I think is important partnership with the state for specific areas that can be best benefit with this kind of tool. But I do believe that it's important to make sure it stays in our toolbox. And if this letter helps us get there and the letter writing campaign helps us get there, you know, I'm going to support the effort. Commissioner Mariano.
So one quick question, Mr. Secretary. Are you comfortable with this letter?
I'd have to look at the letter, although I imagine we probably would be, but I'd look at it. I'd have to see whether we would be a signatory to it or not. We typically try to work with the legislators one-on-one to find a way to get somewhere, and it may not be best for us to be on that letter. I'd have to look and just see,
Yep.
but, because this is being worked out not just by our district. We have our central office and other districts that have similar issues, so, you know, we'll definitely talk about it.
So this particular motion is for this alliance's
This
signature,
alliance,
correct?
to support the letter, yeah.
Okay.
And the social media campaign that goes. And I think anytime you're talking about safety, it's just good to reinforce it. You know, even if there's not a bill, just making people aware that, you know, we are hyper-focused on that. I do want to just mention that, you know, last year, this passed the House. It made it all the way through the House. And it made it to its final committee in the Senate. So these bills for 2 years have gotten really close to being passed. So I'm really glad to hear that maybe, you know, that one-on-one conversation is helping, and maybe it won't be filed again. But, you know, we were really worried last year because the language got better over the committee process, but it started out, you know, with, you know, these things have to go if you can't do it within 1 year. And we're not going to get federal approval within 1 year.
Okay, great, thank you. Seeing no further comments, we'll take a vote. Everybody yay? Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. You had 2 recommendations, didn't you?
The social media campaign goes with
Okay, great. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was very helpful. And I think a good conversation for each of us to take back to our boards as well as our communities to see this move forward. With that, the next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Roundtable. Have we talked about that over and over again already, but, or is that something different?
This is just an opportunity for the members here this morning to, kind of in a roundtable format, share anything of regional significance that the rest of the group may be interested in.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Who wants to go first?
Well, I will go first.
Okay.
I just want to say, DOT had a very interesting open house last night for some solutions at the 5441 crossing. And there's some very creative designs on here that I've never seen before. I'd love to pass this around. There's a video that you can go to on here and watch how some of these are explained. But if you know what the divergent diamond is, this looks like a flat, kind of a, I don't know. It's some very interesting transportation routes that you probably have never seen before. So, and I think that does anyone here recall since I passed it, when you're going to make a decision? When we're going to make a decision on which one we're going to go with? I don't know if
I don't think we have but we'll move the study forward. But I don't have an exact date.
All right, but it's I think it was pretty well attended last night. So.
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Yeah, but we're looking forward to a solution there. It's been a long time coming.
Excellent. Anyone else?
To note on one of them, though, I did ask how long it takes a pedestrian to cross under one of those scenarios. 7 minutes to get from one side to the other.
That's obviously not a pedestrian crossing.
No, it's not. You have to look left, and then you go to another one, you have to look right, and then you have to look left, and then you have to look right, so it's, yeah, it's an interesting dilemma for a pedestrian or cyclist, which probably won't be happening, so, anyway.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. I appreciate the information. Commissioner Kemp?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Alden, for reminding me that in this year's budget, one of the things I put forward and that we did is $1 million for funding on the Upper Tampa Bay Trail. There's been a missing link throughout Hillsborough County, and that would connect it up to the coast-to-coast trail. It's a few miles long. It went dormant about 15 years ago, and there's been a big, huge effort to connect it up. And the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, it has 300,000 users a year. It's the #1 park amenity in Hillsborough County. So that would be a wonderful thing for us, but also for connecting up to the region.
You know, it is also, the trails are also the #1 amenity in our county. And is that gonna come along Keystone or Tarpon and connect? Where's it?
Well, it depends, and maybe, I've been looking at these maps a lot. I think technically the connection on the north part in Hillsborough County is already done.
Oh, that's right.
And I
over on
think,
the
yeah,
Suncoast, yeah.
so, and I think it comes through
Lutz Lake
Lutz.
Fern.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a great trail.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's good news. That's very good news.
Yeah, I would just echo those comments about the trail being probably our most popular thing, probably right behind the beaches. Beaches are clearly in our county, but and we keep working on closing the loop in Pinellas County from north end down through countryside, so we're working on that. We've got a big part of it finished and some other areas. We're starting to work south now, all the way down to the Philly Stadium and now beyond. So really good stuff. A lot of those trails are crossing different roads, and again, getting back to the conversation that we had about flashing beacons, they're critically important. I think they work really well on 2-lane roads, and anything you get above that, it starts to make you a little bit nervous, but people get used to them in certain areas as long as the speed's down. And then the only other thing I would say is, this great conversation this morning, but I think it's really important that bringing our residents along wherever and whatever we talk about is increasingly important, because the vision that we have has to be shared by our residents. And there's a lot of details between now and when we start realizing that. It seems like we start to talk about funding, local funding matches. We start telling everybody about those benefits, and we haven't brought them along. And I'm not pointing out any particular group. I'll just look to our own county in having a better outreach to start having those grassroots discussions. Because it is the younger kids, the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, that are really demanding more transit. But they're not really at the table talking about it, and we need to be doing a better job. So that's all. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we all can probably help people understand transportation funding and planning is really complex. So if we could figure out how to, I mean, I know I need transportation planning for dummies on a regular basis when I'm trying to figure out how, who's on first. So, but, working together, the new website's a great opportunity for being able to share what we can post there as a way of sort of setting the seed in the conversation, and sharing that information with all of our respective bodies, I think would be beneficial. Mr. Albrin, did you have I got the impression you wanted to say something over there, so. Okay, other entities? Yes, and then I'll call on Charles Kluth.
I'd like to say I'm very excited about having this workshop coming up. I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's important as we do have it that we do the business community. The person that comes to mind most likely is that wants to be part of transportation, and has shown that is Jeff Vinnick. But any other business leaders from all around that want to take involved, because it's going to affect everyone for a long time down the road. So I appreciate the conversation, the excitement for it.
Can't agree more. Mr. Kluth.
Yeah, just transportation related, just wanted to let everyone know that cruise is returning to Tampa.
All right.
So starting October 16th, we're going to have the Serenade of the Seas, Royal Caribbean vessel. And within 2 months, by December 16th or 17th, we'll have 5 cruise ships. And we actually may have a 3-ship cruise ship day. So that also impacts the Pinellas beaches and others in the community. We have a lot of drive-up market in Tampa. We probably be at 50% capacity at most initially. I've been working with the cruise lines and the CDC to do memorandums of understanding with all the lines to be able to have, COVID protocols, testing, and, COVID procedures in the terminals. So we're looking forward to that. Like I said, and thanks for everyone for your efforts in supporting the cruise industry in Tampa. Thanks. With respect to the workshop, I just want to mention, though, with CSX is that I've dealt with CSX a lot in the past, and indemnification is going to be a big issue. I know the legislature's, stepped in with SunRail with indemnification, and of course insurance. As we know with the streetcar, the insurance stuff is issues. So they're not easy to deal with, so it'll be an interesting discussion. I think they're going to look for the workshop as well. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks for bringing that. That is an issue that I know Tampa has, the streetcar has had to deal with. So it is complex, but I think we can figure out where all the puzzle pieces are. So thank you.
All right, thanks.
I just wanted to share with you an interesting piece of information I got this week. So, we're all experiencing this explosive growth. And my daughter last year had rented an apartment on State Road 54 in Starkey Ranch. And she is now, I guess she's been almost 2 years now in South Tampa, so it was 2 years ago. But the rents have gone up in our apartments so much this year as the contracts came up for renewal and we don't have enough supply, that her home that she rents near the Tampa Yacht Club is less than the 1-bedroom apartment on State Road 54.
Wow.
It's cheaper for her to live in South Tampa than to live on State Road 54. And we have an employee at the county who's renting an apartment, same complex actually, while his house is being built, and his rent on his 3-bedroom apartment went up $1,000 a month. And he said his rent in an apartment is now more than what his mortgage is going to be in his 5-bedroom house. So I think we're going to have a massive migration north to Hernando because a lot of people can't afford, there are going to be a lot of people who can't afford to live in Pasco County anymore. And it's going to exacerbate our transportation challenges, this problem. So it just was fascinating to me to hear that. And I kind of predicted it, but interesting.
Commissioner Mariano, did you have
I
something
really
you wanted to
wanted
add?
I'm curious about what the rent was.
In a 1-bedroom?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I can text her that, yeah. I don't remember the number. We had to sign for her because she didn't qualify.
I can give you a real-world example.
Yeah.
I'm renting at
Okay.
54 in the Sun Coast. In March, I signed a lease for $13.30 a month on a 2-bed, 2-bath. I looked on the complex's website about 2 weeks ago. It's $2,000 for my unit now.
Wow.
I am very nervous for, a lot of your deputies live in my county. Our apartment complexes are full of your sheriff's deputies and police officers. And they're gonna have to move to Hernando to find a place to live. And teachers, and, it's a problem.
Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized now.
Thank you. I know this is a little off topic.
But it's gonna involve transportation and transit.
But the other thing about this is in Hillsborough County, 2 private corporations have bought more than 10,000 homes speculatively and are renting them out. And they're closing out, people with first homes and everything. They've targeted Riverview, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, good school districts. So these are, and they just walk in there with cash instantly. 10,000 homes are in the hands of 2 private corporations that are then controlling the rents, and people can't build personal wealth. So it's, that is contributing to the issue and allowing, these high rents in the complexes and everything else. And we are now looking at being, from the statistics and information I've seen, one of the most rent hiking areas,
Yep.
and very common that our rents are far more than mortgage payments that you would make on a similar size house.
Commissioner Long, did you have your hand raised? Oh, I'm
did.
sorry.
I just wanted to let everybody know that November 2nd through the 4th is our Gulf Coast Safe Streets Summit. It will be a hybrid summit. Mostly the sessions and presentations will be virtual, but we are also including some in-person mobile workshops and tours as well. And we've got some really good ones lined up. We've got some prizes also lined up. Registration is currently open. You can go to gulfcoastsafestreetsummit.org and register for that. There is no cost to register. We're asking for a donation, basically, of whatever level you think is appropriate. We have some good speakers lined up. We're hopeful that we'll get somebody from the administration in Washington also to give a keynote. Still waiting to hear on that one, but we've made that request as well. And Pinellas is hosting it, but it's really the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance that this represents. And we've already got like really good registration so far. I forget what the exact number is, but I think it's over 100, Chelsea, you know? Yeah. So we're optimistic that this will be the best one yet.
Excellent. I took a look at that. I've got pretty much everybody in my world trying to go. Thank you very much for putting that together. That's going to be a great opportunity for the community to really learn great things, but also, you know, make sure that everybody's on the page. So it's another way of communicating with the public and talking to our citizenry about the good things that are happening not only in this region, but also opportunities for planning in the future. For those of you that haven't seen it yet, the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance website's pretty cool. If you haven't been there for the viewing public, it's suncoasttpa.org is the web address. We want to use that. I know that there's a page that does talk about the Gulf Coast Conference, so that's excellent. But using that as a tool to share information, I think, from all of us, but also to getting that information out to our citizens and our related boards is important. And to your comment about affordable housing, we're in crisis mode in this region. As the chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board for Hillsborough County, we are actually actively working on finding funding out of our general revenues at a level that it is higher than what we're receiving from the state, and looking for all kinds of opportunities to do it as much as possible. I think that in our planning process will also be very important, since much of our funding and rankings are, in terms, if we were to go through a federal process, are now tied to how it relates and how it connects to affordable housing. So we'll need to keep that in mind in our planning, and take advantage of those opportunities, since both those areas and this area are at critical need levels. So thank you very much for the comments. Any other opportunities to share with the group? Seeing none, any other comments? I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm confused right here. Jack, help me out.
Thank you for your comments.
You know, I got the new secretary, so she's still learning. This was here. Tampa Bay Transportation Management Area Leadership Group, Subcommittee of the SCTPA. Are we going by this name or this name?
I think we met somewhere.
Well, I was on the,
We're going by this.
I was on the call when we were naming.
Yeah.